Hello and welcome to Note to File, a clinical research podcast.
A collection of interviews, candid commentary, and general nonsense for the clinical research community.
Check us out at notetofilepodcast.com.
And now, without further ado, on to the show.
All right, guys. Hello. Welcome to another Note to File. It is December 4th, 2025. Denali, how's it going?
Good. Going good. How about you?
Good. Woke up to some snow in Oklahoma this morning, which is uncommon. Luckily, it's too warm for anything to stick. So my daughter was very disappointed. She had to go to school today.
So I woke up and it was -2 this morning. And my son was like, well, is it a snow day because it's so cold? And I was like, oh, buddy, it's got to be like -20 or 30 or something like that. But
That's
he was also disappointed.
-2 is like a normal Wisconsin day, right?
We're actually like 15 degrees below, I think, where we're supposed to be right around now. So who knows?
People shouldn't live in these climates. It's ridiculous.
Yet here we
are. Are we really starting out by judging our geographies?
100%. Yeah, that's kind of welcome to the podcast. I mean, you've got, there's like, think about all the places in like Arizona, California that couldn't possibly exist without man's overwhelming urge to divert water so that we can have golf courses. I mean,
okay, that's a specific type of lifestyle that requires that. People have lived in these areas for hundreds and hundreds of years without doing that. They just didn't.
Thousands even.
I was going to say probably thousands makes sense, but okay, fine. You win. People can live wherever they want. Let's welcome our guest today too, Susannah Fox. Man, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Really happy to have you. Somebody that we met, but more specifically, Denali met. You guys met at Innovation Network gathering from our dear friends Jeff and Michelle. So
it technically wasn't at Innovation Network gathering proper. It was the evening before it started.
Yes, the evening before it started, when I still really didn't know anyone, and I walked into the opening party and immediately became overwhelmed because I was also really hungry.
Happens.
So I walked into the party, took a sharp left, and walked into the bathroom because I was just going to wash my hands and pretend I wasn't part of the event and go sit down at a table alone to eat a hamburger. And
I find that extremely relatable. Keep going.
Thank you. Yeah, so I was feeling really introverted for a moment and noticed this really how should we describe it, Denali? We both admired the way that the paper towel dispenser dispensed exactly the right amount of paper towel.
Right. So like I'd been at we were in the restroom, we were washing our hands. Yeah, and like I think that is something that like, and maybe it's just a pet peeve that clearly we share, but there's it's you go to these bathrooms and you either get like this much and you have to get like 7 to like make any meaningful use, or they are way too long and they like drag onto the counter and get wet, and that's gross, and you have to wash your hands again. It feels icky. And this one was just perfect. Like you could do one and it was great. We were chatting about it. And then you're like, hey, do you want to come sit down? And I think at that point, you didn't even know I was with the same event, right? Right. Like, I mean, there was no people there. I could have been, right? Like, feasibly.
And what's great is I was describing this to a friend. I said, yeah, I'm going to be on this podcast. And I met one of the hosts in kind of a strange way. I was feeling really introverted, and I struck up a conversation with her in a public restroom. And the person that stopped me was like, just so you know, introverts don't strike up conversations in the public restroom. Like, you just don't do that.
So, do you consider yourself an introvert, like normally, or you're saying you were having an introverted moment?
I was having an introverted moment. I am an incorrigible extrovert. Like, I fall into step with people. I chat with people when I'm riding the bus. So as an anthropologist, it's my job to chat with people and learn things. And I love learning from people. I love chatting with people. However, the pandemic shut down when we weren't seeing each other in public. And I felt like I was just like marooned on a ship with my husband and my kid and my dog. I lost my touch. Like I lost my ability to be in crowds. And I'm actually not sure that I've completely gotten it back, which is how I felt when I walked into a room full of people
Right.
that I do think of as future friends. By the end of Innovation Network Gathering, we were, but I didn't know anybody and I was really hungry and it was time to like sit down and be alone and recover my balance. So I don't know if that's relatable to you guys, whether you've always been the same or whether the pandemic changed you at all.
So I would say like interestingly, I always refer to myself as an introvert, but I say I'm an outgoing introvert in the fact that I similarly, like, I like talking to people. I like learning from people. I like experiencing like, new things. But my reaction to the pandemic was, this is wonderful. Like I get to like be in my house and just like I recharge by myself. And so I love going out and doing things, but like that to me, I was like, oh, this is great. Like I'm cozy and I'm in my bubble and I loved that. But I also like talking to people. I don't know. So like I think it changed it, but it just made like my inclination to be like, I don't want to do anything like more socially acceptable for that period of time.
Yeah, I think I've always been fairly introverted, probably maybe less so after the pandemic.
Why?
I don't know. why anything? I don't know. It's hard to know, but I mean the same way in some ways I was not mad, not obviously not happy there's a pandemic happening, but not mad at the prospect of not having to be around throngs of people. But again, I'm like you, like I go to conferences and I'm kind of easily overwhelmed. I'm saying like I would be in the bathroom for 15 minutes just to get, nobody can talk to me. Like that's maybe a little true introvert. You try to talk to me in the bathroom about that, I'm like, please don't fucking talk to me. So, but I can appreciate that you guys connected over the.
Women might talk more in bathrooms than men do. I don't know,
probably.
but it also was just a sense of like, I can't help but admire this paper towel dispenser.
It was just so genuine. I'm like, this is really cool. Am I the only one? Like, where it's like, yes, this needs to be appreciated.
No, that's one of the small pleasures in life that I can appreciate, that you can bond over. I mean, not just appreciate it for what it is, but then also bond over it. It's a beautiful story.
Well, yeah, then we ended up sitting down and eating and
having an awesome conversation.
Yeah. And like, it was funny because this was one that we were, Brad and I were like co-hosting. I don't know, how did you describe the event, Brad? Like we were,
I don't know. We were
guesting there. We were there. And then Brad at one point was like, where did you go? Like you disappeared. I was like, I made a friend. It was great. And like, I got to sit down and just like talk. And like, again, I love like getting to know and sitting down and talking to people. And I feel like sometimes at those big events, like it can be very surface and overwhelming as well. Like I get that sort of vibe too. So I was like, this is perfect. I love this.
So, and I'll say, I have this friend who was actually my +1 for the conference. If anybody met her, Risa E. Lewis, she is an MD and someone who is very thoughtful about how do you handle all kinds of different situations. And she wrote this book, Micro Skills, about these little skills that you can bring into your professional life and personal life. And her micro skill for being introverted or having an introvert moment at a conference is to pull someone aside and say, hey, let's go over here and just have a chat. Or even better, plan in advance. Like know that you don't shine in a big cocktail mixer. So plan in advance and invite 3 people to have dinner with you. So that you don't have that feeling of overwhelm. So anyway, shout out to Risa and her.
Awesome. What if you're also a procrastinator, and so you're not gonna plan a dinner, but then you're also an introvert? So I need a micro
just
skill
asking for a friend,
procrastination.
though, right? Just for a friend,
just for some guy I know. I don't know.
Hang up by the bar.
I mean, that's
up to the bartender.
Honestly, the biggest micro skill is about 2 drinks, and then I can be an extrovert, and it just seems to work a whole lot better. I don't know.
So I think what I'm really curious. So you mentioned like you didn't know anyone going into ING. Mm-hmm. You came, you spoke about your book, Rebel Health. How did you get plugged into ING? How did that happen?
So it was actually because of Rare Disease Day. So maybe I should introduce myself and say who I am and
Love
why
it.
I'm here.
Let's do that.
We
Let's start there.
should do that. We're a quarter of the way
loop to
done, but
this.
please do that.
So Susannah Fox. I call myself an internet geologist because I look for patterns in the online landscape and try to help people, organizations, companies understand the world as it is and try to make some predictions about where things are going so that you can build on solid ground, not on sand or in an earthquake-prone environment.
Okay.
Which is why I came up with the term internet geologist. What that means is I studied anthropology, and what I like to do as a researcher is pair field work in communities. And often I hang out in communities of people living with rare and life-changing diagnoses, because if you want to see the future, you want to hang out with the people who are already on the frontier of whatever field you're in. And in medical device technology, healthcare services, pharmaceutical development, you want to hang out with the people who are rare, who are not yet diagnosed, who are living with some life-changing situation because they're going to make a way out of no way. And which is why I got that advice really early in my career, and was I love doing field work in rare disease communities, and I live in Washington, D.C. And by the way, we do have good sources of water, so I feel comfortable revealing that I live
revealing his location.
That means that I can get to the National Institutes of Health and FDA Rare Disease Day every year, which happens on either February 28th or February 29th, Leap Day, the rarest day of the year. And it is an awesome program every year because it's both families and patients, as well as scientists, researchers, clinicians from all over the world who are making incredible strides. And it's like a once a year field of vision into the future. And people had already gathered in 2024 when the Trump administration canceled it. And so there were a lot of people already in town. And so there was actually a renegade Rare Disease Day held in the basement of a hotel, like a hotel conference room. And I saw, and I'm so embarrassed because I'm going to space on her name. And so I'm going to get it wrong. I'm like desperate, like Rana's Fun Lab,
Rona's Fun Lab.
Rona's Fun Lab. Her mom spoke. Say it again.
Lindsay.
We love Lindsay. And when Lindsay came off stage, I basically made a beeline over to her and was like, I need to know everything about you. I need to know more of your story. And then she saw me speak, and I was presenting data from some research that I'd done. I did the first nationally representative survey about the prevalence of rare disease in the US. It actually had never been surveyed before. And I released that data at that conference. And she was like, you need to come to Innovation Network Gathering. And she introduced me to Jeff and Michelle, Jeff Smith and Michelle Jones. And this is not usually my crowd, you guys. I built websites in the 90s. I was a startup kid in the 90s. I then switched gears to become a researcher. I had this crazy helicopter ride to the top of the American healthcare system, serving as the chief technology officer for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in the Obama administration. And since then, I have been advising both startup companies and established companies about the future of health and technology, with pharma actually just being one of many areas that I have a sort of a thin understanding of. But if invited, I would love to come and tell people what I think, which is what happened.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I guess when you covered some of this like in your talk, but I'm curious, maybe talk a little bit about the sort of, is there a bridge between, rebel health and clinical trials, right? So things like, some of the stuff in the book where a lot of it resonated in a way that, but how can we bring some of those tenets or ideas like to the clinical trials field? I think there's a lot of value to be had there, but there are things that are probably seen as maybe even being a little too outside the box. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a couple core principles to what I call the patient-led revolution. And the word patient is a stand-in for survivors, caregivers, anyone who has lived experience with health and illness and disability. And one of the core principles is that people with lived experience have insights to share that would benefit problem solvers, whether that's in pharma, in life sciences, in government, in any kind of environment. You always want to get to the people who are using the product, who are using the service, who are going through the clinical trial. And I gave an example in my talk of someone who, Michael Katz, who was living with multiple myeloma and had gone through treatment, and then had networked with thousands of other patients and heard from them that they wanted to see if scientists were willing to test a lower dose of dexamethasone as the first-line treatment. Because, this audience might know dexamethasone is really tough to take at a high dose. And it had always been given at a high dose just by default. And it was the patients themselves who said, but could we try it at a lower dose? And they found that it was more effective and easier for folks to stay on the trial and stay alive. And so now that's the new standard. And for some audiences, I also like to add that the publication that resulted from this study is, I believe, the most cited paper in multiple myeloma. It appeared in the Lancet. And if that matters to you, like, that's an example of a patient-led research question that resulted in somebody's career doing well.
Real well.
In addition to helping the patients.
Yeah. And obviously that's an amazing example. We hear, in the research field so often, patient centricity, bringing patients in, to the process. And again, I don't know from your position if you're able to tell, but like, do you feel like this is something that is truly catching on more? A lot of what we see and read in our field is just kind of feel good,
marketing.
headliney. Yes, it's essentially marketing.
It's marketing and PR.
Oftentimes there's very little truth or weight like to those claims. I mean, is that something you've seen from your perspective, that there's been a more tolerance to try to do those sorts of things?
I think there's more awareness of the benefit of working with people with lived experience. And I also see more companies that are trying to help clinical science organizations, companies understand it and tap into it. I'm thinking, for example, of Savvy Cooperative, which pairs patients with people who need those insights about, so how are we going to design a trial that people will be eager to be part of? So I see more insights going that way. Something that I don't know a lot about, but I have looked at with a little bit of worry is how many trials are moving overseas, because there might be rules or trends that are happening in the US or requirements, but those aren't requirements necessarily in other countries. And so how is that going to play against the very American notion that we should be contributing to the science? Let's just say the future is unevenly distributed in terms of that.
Well,
Surely not.
Well, I think it's interesting because we've talked about that a lot, especially recently with some of the trends of where research is going globally, given some of the trends in the US regarding funding and immigration, and also just the ability to execute research more inexpensively and easier in other locations. It'll be interesting to your point, because we haven't looked at it through the lens of like, okay, how do you engage then the patient? Because I mean, in my mind, even here in the US, we're still at a rudimentary level of involving the patient in the clinical trials landscape. And so we're still trying that. And that's, to your point, like, it's a grassroots, like it's pushing up to get that to happen. It's not like open arms, like, what do you want to hear? Like, maybe we have one patient on our advisor board and we say, hey, we did it. We did the thing, but it's not true engagement. I would wager we probably are seeing none of that globally, right?
And
I would tack on too, because I think like in the book mentions a lot about like peer-to-peer networks and how like can that be, I hate to use the word leverage because it feels kind of transaction-y, but like, obviously clinical trial recruitment is shit, like as it stands in a more traditional sort of academic model. So is there a way to sort of integrate that in those peer-to-peer networks more? I don't know. More at all. Let's just say at all.
So National Breast Cancer Coalition, great example of a grassroots organization in, obviously a very well-known, non-stigmatized now disease state that use their peer-to-peer networks to recruit people for clinical trials that otherwise would have failed. The advice that I give to people, or what I can look at the long line of history and say, if someone has dominant market share, they're actually not going to be very interested in the patient-led revolution. Okay.
Yeah, of course.
Like this, like I said at the beginning, like if you think the status quo in healthcare is okay, then my talk is not for you. like if you are very comfortable with your market share, if you're comfortable with the way that your clinical trials are being designed and recruited, like this may not be for you. But if you're like the third in the market or even the second in the market, like a competitive advantage is to get in on the insights that patients and caregivers can share with you, to get in on that peer-to-peer, like networkers who, I talk about the 4 types of people you'll meet in the revolution. Seekers are the people who have that spark of like, I'm going to go and find out. We need seekers to look for the clinical trials. Second group are networkers. Networkers are the ones who spread the good news and the bad news. Networkers are like your natural marketing partners. The solvers are the people who are bringing their engineering background or whatever else they do in their professional lives or private lives. They bring that to healthcare to help solve a specific problem. And then the champions are the ones who look across the landscape and say, oh, there's an amazing patient-led group trying to do something here, and it actually aligns with my business imperative. So let me get in on that and, again, get that competitive advantage. So I'm hopeful. The other place that I see it is in rare disease. So in a place that's being ignored. That rare disease folks will say, hey, we'll do all the work to recruit a patient registry. And we're also going to fundraise, but we want to be at the table when you talk about the research questions.
Yeah. And that makes sense. That makes sense.
I think that's the biggest challenge, though, where it's like, I know I kind of come back to like patient recruitment ultimately is a protocol design problem. Ultimately, right? So it's like if you're designing a protocol that's not for people who are real or realistic or going to be done. I think the example I've heard in this is like they were designing an oncology protocol and they were like, well, we're going to do, instead of doing a blood draw, we're going to do a mouth swab because it's less invasive. And it's going to be great. The patients are going to love it because we're taking less blood and we're just going to swab their mouth. Mm-hmm. And you have the patients come in and their patients, part of the protocol is they're on chemo. Well, they have dry mouth. Oof. And so and they're already giving blood because they already have to get some labs drawn. And so they're like, so why don't you just take another vial? You already have everything set up. Instead, you're trying to like now get this cheek swab from them. And so like in theory, the protocol was designed. This makes total sense. But you didn't actually talk to a patient with a lived experience who was going to go through this. And so it's like the design itself of how to design it fell down, let alone.
It's an interesting dovetail too, because I think different, I mean, look, what we do is so like vigorously validated outcomes, but like we're not always looking at, you know, community defined measures of success, which I think is another, you know, theme measure that's mentioned there. So like, again, I feel like I wish I was slightly smarter, because I feel like I've seen a couple instances recently where I was like, oh, that's interesting. And it does seem like a couple of companies have taken input from the patients to know like what matters to them. They may not care about a increase of a or decrease of a particular biomarker. They want their quality of life to be better. So I, again, seeing that incorporated more into research to actually care about giving meaningful outcomes to patients and not just, you know, raising a cell count or something along those lines. So I think that's fascinating.
It comes back to, I mean, there's all these ways this could work, and we hear people saying that they're doing it, but like, I don't know, are we seeing that it's actually happening? I mean, in clinical trials, that this is, I mean, rare disease, yeah, you mentioned that's a thing in like the breast cancer, like holistically, are we seeing this? I guess more so, are we seeing the champions, really, right? Are we seeing like the people who have the business case? Are we seeing the pharma companies who ultimately do make quite a lot of the impactful decisions that trickle down in the industry? Are we seeing this be picked up at all by those groups, or is it still fairly grassroots?
I don't know of a study that looks across. I found an article in JAMA that I wrote about recently that looked across all clinical trials to see how many people actually involve patients in the design, and it was very low. And what I loved about the article is that it then listed all the ways that if you read this article and you do want to involve patients, here are all the toolboxes that are available to do this. And that is, you could see that as glass half full, meaning like, wow, look at all the ways that people know how to do this. Or glass half empty, like, wow, look at all the toolboxes that just are lying there unused. So I think academics have a role to play in creating those toolboxes, but I think that there's also a need for implementation and for publicity of how did that go? Like, what's the best toolbox? And what's a good outcome from it?
Yeah, that is interesting. And I want to circle back to a little bit, maybe this may touch on what you mentioned earlier, this kind of particular interest of mine, but you know, I follow things like the biohacker community, right? And we see a lot of people who are really into self-experimentation. So the sort of N equals one, right? And I know this is, I think, also talked about a little bit in the book, but like, is there a way, or like do you see the potential as things like that begin to become a little bit more popular, where that can start to be leveraged into clinical research, you know, without compromising rigor and things like this? Because I think that's I don't know, you know, some guys like Ben Greenfield and all the guys experimenting on themselves that, you know, we don't really have RCTs for, but there's something there. I'm really curious about that. And like, again, is that a trend you see continuing? And is there a way to sort of leverage that into something bigger in terms of potential, maybe even as far as FDA approvals at some point?
Today's biohacking was yesterday's quantified self. And I actually did the first nationally representative survey to measure how many people are doing any kind of tracking for their health. And this was like before Fitbit. This was a long time ago. And one thing that we found is that if it depends on how you write the survey question, but I'm a big believer in writing a survey question that isn't tied to a certain technology. And what we found is that there's a huge number of American adults who are tracking some aspect of their health. And a lot of them are tracking it just in a notebook, or in their heads, but they're tracking, they're aware of it. And so many of us are doing this as amateurs. And what if we could level everybody up? What if we could upskill everybody so that they had the tools that they needed to really measure things so that people could, figure out, for example, the quality of their sleep and how that pertains to their mental acuity. That's not at a population level. But that's a big interest of biohackers. So what, when do you stop eating? How cold should your room be, et cetera? At the clinical level, we saw this during COVID, that the more that patients themselves were able to track the symptoms of what turned out to be called long COVID, that was something that was identified and named by patients, and that otherwise was going unnoticed by clinicians, scientists, and World Health authorities. And that's because patients themselves, some of them were solvers, some of them were scientists who knew how to track effectively what their symptoms were. And with data, they were able to show the world community that this is real. And so how might we empower everybody to have those kinds of tools so that they can contribute not only to making sure that their health is optimized, but that when asked by their doctor or asked by a scientist, they have data to show. And that's what I get super excited about of what are the basic tools that we should all have, and how can we make sure that the skills are available to everybody?
Well, I think is interesting that I've been sort of thinking about is how does this apply then to the segments of the population who are health illiterate or who don't have the wherewithal or even the awareness of the healthcare realm. And so how can they get involved in some of this stuff? And I think we talked a little bit with, Dell and one of our other things about like increasing awareness and, access and trust. But I think like that's a huge piece that I have questions about, like, how do we engage that community in this grassroots movement who maybe this isn't even on their radar or even as a thing, let alone something they could engage in.
Yeah, I love that interview with Dell. I think also of my friend, Dr. Lisa Fitzpatrick, who runs an organization called Grapevine Health. And she has these great YouTube videos where it's Dr. Lisa on the street, and she will go just in front of a grocery store in a neighborhood in DC and bring like an anatomy, like something from a classroom, and just talk to people about like, well, this is your liver and this was what it does. And it's kind of on the street medical education, and talking to people about their real concerns and in a way that is approachable and meeting people where they are. I also think about how we can't count out the community leadership that exists and the network effect of, just because someone themselves doesn't have medical, health literacy or health numeracy, they might have a niece who's a nursing student that they can ask. How might we make sure that, librarians in the public library are able to help people with search terms and connecting people with information? Spreading this out, like my passion is looking for areas of society where there's an imbalance of power, and especially an imbalance of access to data and information, and trying to flip it. And healthcare is just like the thing that I've been obsessed with for 20 years. Before this, I actually, like early in my career, I worked at US News and World Report. I helped them start their website. And you guys probably know they rank colleges.
Yep. And hospitals. Yep.
Oh. And hospitals. And when we launched the website in 1996, we actually took all of the data for the 1,400 schools. The magazine collects a huge amount of data. And then they smush it all up and it goes into a black box and it spits out these rankings. what we on the web team did until we were apprehended was that we allowed students and their parents to re-rank the schools according to what's important to them. Because if you want to stay in Wisconsin, if you want to stay in Oklahoma, or you want to go to school in the Pacific Northwest and study something certain or play a certain sport, it doesn't matter that Yale is number one, right? I mean, who cares? How many people get to go to Yale? Not that many.
Yeah.
Or want to.
And so how can we take that idea and flip it? How can we make sure that everybody has access to the information they need to make a thoughtful, mindful decision?
No, just the newspaper should tell me what's best. And that's what I believe. All right, before we get towards the end here, you did mention pre-tape that you've taken an interesting journey as of late, and I want you to talk about that for at least.
Yes, indeed. So what I've been up to recently is that I attended a death doula training retreat. It was an intensive 4-day retreat. And the organization that creates the training is called Going with Grace. And I have Elua Arthur's book right here, Briefly Perfectly Human. And what happened is that I read this book, as did a really close friend of mine. Hi, Delina. Delina Price McFall.
Shout out Delina.
Shout out to Lena. We've been friends for 25 years, and we can never find anybody who's as interested or comfortable talking about death as we are, until we went to this retreat. We found 48 other people who have either, as I have, as an amateur death doula, I took care of my dad for the last year of his life, and I took care of a dear relative who was kind of like an honorary uncle or grandpa to me. His name was Mitsuru Yasuhara. He grew up in Japan. I was Mitsuru's caregiver until the end of his life. And I felt like I was learning something with each experience. And I wanted to level up. I wanted to skip ahead a few spaces on the game board so that next time I was caring for someone at the end of their life, I really would know what I was doing. And I urge everybody to think about, well, first of all, if you can watch Elua's TED Talk. She's an awesome TED Talk. Read her book. The intensive 4-day training is not for everyone, but I invite you to think about how taboo the discussion of death is, certainly in our culture. And we really, by facing it, by talking about it, it makes me more excited to be alive and to make the most out of every day. And it gives me confidence so that when, it's not if, it's when a loved one or myself is facing the end of life, I'll go into it with information and knowledge. I should say that when I got pregnant with my first child, my husband and I did complete a 10-week intensive Bradley method childbirth course, and we essentially could have given birth to that child at home. Results may vary. Like, I am clearly a nerd. When my older daughter went to college in California, this East Coaster got freaked out by earthquakes. I became a topic expert on earthquake preparedness. So that's me.
You're a seeker?
I'm totally a seeker.
Yeah, well, I'm fascinated by this, so I may hit you up offline.
It's an interesting topic. So I've had the unfortunate experience, or fortunate, I've had lots of death in my life, and I got involved with a group when I was younger called Camp Hope as a counselor, where it's a camp locally that brings kids out who have had folks die. And I think it's the topic you mentioned, which I think is a huge pervasive conversation that we have at this camp, is that it's okay to talk about death. Yeah. We have a lot of kids who parents die, siblings die, and their friend group, you can't talk to 8-year-olds. People aren't comfortable with it. And even still now, I'm sure you've recognized this too, like people are uncomfortable talking about death. And so giving a space for these kids who are very young, developmentally at a very different stage, but giving them a place like, it's okay. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to talk about death. Those are all okay things. It's also okay to laugh. And so being involved in that and giving that space, but it's an interesting concept in our culture where we just don't talk about it. People aren't comfortable about it. And so having that space to do it is important.
Thank you so much. And you're also identifying something that loops back to what we've been talking about, in that you are not alone. There are people who would love to help you if only they knew how to find you. And peer-to-peer is an incredibly important way to learn from each other and support each other. And by creating Camp Hope, the organizers are able to create a peer-to-peer group of other children who say to themselves, I'm not the only one whose mom died or whose dad died.
Yeah. That's interesting. Interesting thing is, I find it fascinating that you went on that retreat. So where is it, out of curiosity?
So they hold them all over the country. Delina and I chose to go to the one in LA because we had these dreams of walking on the beach every morning. And it was 4 days of torrential rain. Which never happens in LA.
Very good. We're down to the end here. Susannah, I want to thank you for coming on. Anything you want to end with? Any final thoughts?
I would love to give a shout out to the patient-led research scorecards, which were developed by the patient-led research collaborative on long COVID. It is a way to approach and think about involving patients in research. So maybe I'll put a link on the LinkedIn to that.
Yeah, we can put it in the show notes too. Feel free to send a link. Where can people buy your book?
Oh, anywhere where books are sold. Thank you.
There you go.
It's great. Right. Everyone should pick up a copy.
And if you listen to the audiobook, I do have all the illustrations on my website, susannahfox.com.
Beautiful. All right. We'll be back. When will we be back, Denali?
Next Tuesday.
Okay. Back next Tuesday with another Sticky Notes. Susannah, thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We'll see you guys next week. See you. Thanks for listening to Note to File. We're committed to continuing to bring you independent and unfiltered coverage of the clinical trial industry.
We want to talk about what you want to hear. So if you have something on your mind, hit us up at notetofilepodcast.com.